So habari ya Dodoma. Oh, we're live.
Zuri.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. A very special welcome to you all, our listeners, our viewers around the world. This is Today's Africa. And I am your host, Dr. FM, Francis Munangi Mpindu, coming live from Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. This is where you can expect informative, brave conversations on matters pertaining to Africa. We do bring in various guests to be with us, and today we have one of those exceptional guests, and in a moment I will be introducing him to us so that we can have a conversation with him. Our topic for today is the legacy of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. Any African and any other person around the world, when they hear that name, they will remember that this was one of those exceptional transformational leaders that Africa has ever had. And we know that there are other people who are seeking to pursue and to maintain his legacy. But then we have other people who have been part of his journey. Some of us were much, much younger then, but people have taken interest in getting to understand who this wonderful Pan-Africanist was and will continue to be in and across Africa and beyond. So again, welcome our listeners and our viewers around the world. We broadcast in over 140 different countries. So this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity where we bring in different guests to talk about matters pertaining to Africa. And today our guest is Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah. He is a son of Africa. And we have been friends for quite a while. And I will be sharing some of those things a little later on, just so that you know that this is a very, very special friend to me and a special friend to all of us. He is from the Republic of Tanzania. And so no other person would be best suited to have this conversation with us. And so again, we welcome you. We'd like to ask you to make sure that you like, you subscribe, you like, you share. We are live as well on YouTube. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course, StreamYard. So, Dr. Mbennah, Professor Mbennah, Ambassador Mbennah, he has so many titles. And he was the former ambassador to the Republic of Zimbabwe. And so there's so many things we could talk about. You know what, Professor?
Yes.
It will be appropriate for us to just say, tell us briefly some of those titles you have had over the last little while before we get into our topic for today, which is a big topic. I know that we have people who have been waiting to have you come on online so that we have this conversation. So tell us briefly, who is Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah? Who is he?
Thank you, Dr. Mpindu, my friend, for the opportunity to join your program and to share on a topic that is very close to my heart, the legacy of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. But just as you said, I begin to introduce myself a little bit about the titles. There will be too many, so I'll say those that matter today. Yes, I'm a former ambassador of the Republic of Tanzania, or the United Republic of Tanzania, to the Republic of Zimbabwe, and High Commissioner of the United Republic of Tanzania to the Republic of Mauritius, concurrently serving both countries based in Harare, Zimbabwe. until recently. Prior to that, I was the Vice Chancellor, or you may wish to say President, of St. John's University of Tanzania, based in Dodoma. As Vice Chancellor for 5 years, I, of course, championed the leadership of the university. I have also served in other capacities, but so professor, I'm a professor of communication. I'm a theologian also, so I'm associate professor of biblical studies. I am an Anglican priest, so those Anglicans will be familiar with the title Reverend and maybe even Reverend Canon, because I'm a canon. So those, I prefer in the context of our conversation today, just Ambassador Professor will be sufficient.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Karibu, karibu. You know that when we met up in Kenya at Daystar University, and I was trying to learn my Kiswahili, every now and again you would correct me. I remember very, very well. There was a phrase that I would say, "Acha mimi niende," which simply means, "Hey, let me go." And you would say, "Nana nakushika," who is holding you? So I still remember that. So you were very, very generous in helping me to learn my Kiswahili. And I have actually maintained it. And I do have some friends, even here in Milwaukee, who are from uh, Kenya and Tanzania. And every now and again, we get together and I get to polish up my Kiswahili. But hey,
Right.
we are here today. Um, Ambassador Professor Mbennah, we're glad you're here today. I'm glad to hear you say that this topic is very, very close to your heart. I know that you and I are probably most likely, if my visual and my memory serves me well, we are pretty much within the same age bracket. So when Mzee Mwalimu Julius Nyerere was active and doing all these things in Africa, you and I, we were
We're
tiny
around.
little, we were not around and tiny little babies later on, and we got to learn about him. But you have taken an interest in his legacy, his history, his policies, his views. And let me just preface this and say one of the things that stood out for me was, by the way, the word Tanganyika in Shona, Tanganyika is like the starting of the country, which then refers to Tanzania being the first of those African countries to be independent. So there's a very strong relationship there. So he actually said he would have preferred that Tanganyika, Tanzania would not have been independent until all of Africa was independent, because that's how committed he was to unity and making sure that we work together as a team. But that didn't happen. And I remember listening to one of his audios on YouTube, and he said, "I'm very disappointed that we didn't do that." So he is a man who did so much for the rest of Africa. And sometimes we wonder whether we do honor and respect and take time to reflect on those things that built who he was. So I'm going to give you an open mic right now and just say, get us started on this Pan Africanist, a man who loved Africa, not just Tanzania, but Africa.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Yes, indeed, Doctor. Yes, as you correctly say, we grew up in the from the early 60s, when Mwalimu was very much active, and even with limited access to radio and the rest of the media, we still had some way to access information about him or hear when he spoke. And so we got to know him as a very I got to know him as a very inspirational leader. He spoke very well. He articulated issues that were very relevant. He spoke the language of the people in terms of perspectives, in terms of addressing needs, real needs. So he was very much present in the feelings of many, even young people among ourselves, as we were. We would feel every single day there is a Julius Nyerere somewhere, because of his very very present, in the social sphere of the country. Nyerere was born in April 1922 and died, as we know, on the 14th of October 1999, 77 years and 6 months and 1 day, to be precise. So he had that much life, and within that, the years he lived, he made contributions to not only Tanzania and Africa, but in fact to humanity. He was a man with a vision for humanity, not simply for a small portion of the globe or of the continent. So it was really, yes, Tanganyika, then Tanzania, but also Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa, the rest of the world. His sense of vision was that humanity will be better, will be rid of poverty and suffering and oppression and injustices, and would live to the realities of a fair and equal society for everyone. It's safe to live, everyone feeling of value, the integrity of people respected because they're people, not because they were people of a certain color or of a certain class. So he was a man who inspired me from my early years as a young person. His values as a leader. So this is Nyerere. So he championed the struggles of the independence of Tanganyika, which we attained our independence in 1961, and then 3 years later we joined with the Zanzibar to form the United Republic of Tanzania again. Him being the key player in that process, a firm believer of unity and togetherness. And then his contributions, of course, as many will say, will be his very strong Pan-African perspective. He was very instrumental in the founding of the, which was the precursor to the African Union today. He was among the Nkrumahs and people like those who would champion the formation of the unity of the African continent and African peoples. He championed the formation of the East African Unity community, which initially 3 countries of Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, but now 8 countries, including Rwanda and Burundi and South Sudan and the Republic of Somalia and the DRC, all those. Now 8 countries. He, as you would know, championed the liberation of Southern African states, Zimbabwe, my cherished country, but also South Africa, where I've lived for many years, Namibia, Mozambique, countries like those. They would have their independence movements, political movements, even military wings, based and trained in Tanzania. So he hosted those and supported materially, morally, philosophically, diplomatically, supported the liberation of all the countries in Southern Africa, upon which then the Southern African Development Community, as we have it today, SADC, was founded after those countries became independent. So across the African continent, from the African Union to the East African Community to SADC and to the independence movements, all those would say Mwalimu was very much the pro-humanity. He wanted a better humanity. He wanted to see a humanity that is united, is one, it's equal, and is free from every form of bondage, including political and economic bondages. That was Mwalimu in a nutshell. You can say a lot more, which I hope I'll say once I hear from you of your next question, if you have. But he would have left a legacy of what it means to be a true Pan-African, a true statesman, a true leader. He still commands respect, even though he's long gone. We still make reference to what he said and what he would have said today in this situation. So he's still very much providing inspiration and leadership. His principles of integrity and equality and freedom, and his very firm, consistent opposition to injustices and inequality and discrimination. Those are things that he lived. He did not just speak about them. He demonstrated in his own life. He was quite a man, I would say.
Ambassador Professor Mbennah, that is quite informational, loaded. It's pregnant with meaning. And there are so many words that you mentioned that just really open a can of worms, because one of the things I know is knowing who he is and who he was. He knew that colonization had done something to Africa. And he was one of those leaders who fought against tribalism and segregation to the core. If I remember correctly, in Tanzania right now, sir, you can correct me if I'm wrong, people are not hung up on what tribe you belong to. They are there. People do not ignore them. But nothing is played on the political level in terms of who is who forms up the majority of this party or that faction or whatever. It's the people of Tanzania. He was committed to humanity, like you said. How did he earn the title Mwalimu?
Yeah, Mwalimu, as you probably know, Mwalimu means teacher.
Correct.
He was a high school teacher, so professionally he was a teacher. But that would have ceased with leaving the teaching. He resigned to go into politics in order to lead the movement for independence. But he chose to remain Mwalimu because he wanted to use the notion of teaching and educating as important for the emancipation of people. Yes, as you correctly say, colonialism did something negative and grave on the peoples of Africa, including some kind of a dented identity and some kind of damaged sense of self-esteem. So Mwalimu would teach that we are all human beings. He would say, all human beings are my brothers and sisters, and Africa is one. So he wanted to say, we are a people, we are sovereign, we are capable, and he wanted to use education as a tool. That's one. And two, he cherished unity among people. He knew that part of the reasons the colonialists would succeed to subdue Africa was the divide and conquer principle that they used. They would use our tribes and communities to divide us and even cause us to fight against each other. So Nyerere, Mwalimu, brought together the people of Tanganyika and later on Tanzania in general, using the one language which he chose, which did not belong to a particular tribe, Kiswahili. And so he spoke that language, an African language, rather than use a foreign language. So he spoke Kiswahili and had people speak Kiswahili. And through that, people got united, and the sense of being a nation, a people, was born. And of course, he because he was a teacher, he valued the education, and he saw the importance of education, the power of education to bring people together and to transform people. He also championed education for everyone. Everyone should have access to education. But also he said education must be education that is relevant to the context of the people here. So Mwalimu, in many ways, from definition of our self-identities to our unity and the need to be together, to the choice of language that would unite people, to the expression of value of education that he had, and the programs that he ran to make sure people had access to education that was relevant to the context. So very much Mwalimu, yeah, uniting people, believing in the oneness of people and the equality of people. I would say for now, many more you can say why Mwalimu. He still teaches. How do you how do you live your Christian faith? He was a devout Catholic. How do you live your Christian faith personally, privately, and still be a politician of integrity without imposing your faith on anyone? That's a lesson that has left to many people. Many people are unable to uh, differentiate between what is personal and private and what is public and professional in their responsibilities. So he's Mwalimu in many ways. Mwalimu in many ways, I would say.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah, for whetting our appetite on Mzee Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. There are quite a number of things that you have mentioned again that just would not even allow us to have ample time to even get into them. And so I'd like to let you know, sir, just from the very beginning, that we will have you back. We have to have a part 1 and part 2 and part 3 and part 4
By all
of
means,
this
by all
over
means.
the next little while. So again, Asante Sana, thank you very much, sir. Or as they say in Ghana, Medasi. We are live on Today's Africa, and this is your host, Dr. FM, on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And we are honored today to have Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah, who is currently the National Director of TeachBeyond Tanzania, working to advance the philosophy and principles and practices of transformational education. He's the former Tanzania Ambassador, Extraordinary Plenipotentiary to the Republic of Zimbabwe and High Commissioner to the Republic of Mauritius. I had to look up that big word there, plenipotentiary, and I'm like, wow, okay. We do have ambassadors and high commissioners in various countries who, under the foreign affairs ministry, would participate in various activities within the country where they are representing. But to be an extraordinary and plenipotentiary, it means that you have full authority, independent authority to act on your uh, on actions pertaining to that country, representing your own people. And that is a lot of power and that is a lot of responsibility. So when I saw that, I said to myself, this is amazing that they would give you such authority to be able to make decisions without having to say, okay, let me check with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, let me check with so and so on. There's so much invested in you to be able to do that. And obviously, as professor, we know that you are the former vice chancellor and president of St. John's University in Tanzania, based in Dodoma. And there are so many other things that you have done, worked with various organizations, Trans World Radio, worked with Compassion. There are so
Correct.
many other things that you have done, and we feel very, very honored to be with you. So, our listeners and viewers, we are here live on Today's Africa on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio with our guest, Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mbennah. And we're talking about the legacy of Mzee Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. One of the things that I realize when it comes to his emphasis on unity, which you've already intimated to, sir, is the use of language. He was an articulate man. The first time growing up, when I actually had access to some of his speeches, I was like, wow. You know, he is, and I mean that, he is the kind of leader who would speak from his heart. They would give him the
Yeah.
mic, and he had photographic memory. he would go through years, various years of history and events and these happenings, and he had nothing in front of him with regards to notes. That's how sharp he was. And obviously, when he introduced the use of Kiswahili in East Africa, in Tanzania and East Africa as well, that was meant to unite people. Now, I
Yeah,
know that there was only one, um, I believe there was only one language that was taught in English, and that was English.
correct,
All the other subjects were taught in Kiswahili.
correct.
Now, that highlights the importance of language. How are things now in terms of his legacy for language? What is happening? And try to put that as well within the context of Africa. You having been and still are ambassador as a lifelong title that you have. How do you see the place of language in Africa and what is happening to Africa?
Dr. Francis, you and I have had training, even advanced training in communication. Even if we leave Mwalimu for a moment, language is crucial in the formation of the philosophical makeup of a people. The language you speak has an influence in the manner you process things cognitively in your mind. So not just the manner of speaking, but the actual language that you speak. And so that is true also of Kiswahili. If we know, and I need to be careful here with the, how I make references, but the people who speak French have a certain mindset that is very French, just on account of the fact that they speak that language. Same way, people who speak English primarily, English, have a certain tendency, cognitive tendency of processing things not independent of the influence of language, the language they speak. That applies also in Kiswahili. So if you, Kiswahili as a language is not just a language, is also a culture. It has inherent values and inherent assumptions. It has certain feelings that it generates when you speak it. And so to the extent that people speak the same language, to that extent also they tend to function in their mind in similar ways. They tend to experience the effect of speaking a language in similar ways. And so Tanzania, Kiswahili being an African language, of course, I would say it has a decolonizing contribution or advantage to the people who speak it, if they speak that primarily. And therefore, I would say a certain patriotic mindset, a certain independence, a certain self-esteem, a certain confidence would have been generated by the fact that people speak a language other than a European language. And today it's still the case. Most people in Tanzania speak Swahili, and now we are even taking Swahili into the diplomatic circles. My colleagues who are still in foreign service are working very hard to promote Swahili globally, even at the UN level, if possible, so that Kiswahili becomes the 7th UN language, official languages of the United Nations. It already is the language of the African Union. It already is the language of SADC, official language. East Africa is the same. So Swahili is continues to be a unifying factor for the people of Tanzania and people of East Africa, but is also growing in its use to very high levels of global governance structures. African Union, East African Community, even now efforts are being made to have it as a language of the United Nations. So it's still a very crucial language, and it's still playing a very important decolonizing and African identity defining contribution that it's making. I think it's a good thing. And even now, we still teach in primary schools. We still teach everything in Swahili. Only English is taught in English. But as it was before, in high school and universities, then everything is taught in English. I don't want to say unfortunately, but it still is. I hope someday we say, Kiswahili is scientific enough to be used for any academic or the highest level of scientific research even. So there's no reason to not use it at any level of learning, of teaching and learning.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Professor, for those comments on language, because as you said, language unites people. And when you use a certain language, there is something that connects with your identity and principles. Correct. And expressions and all that. And this is why I feel that I really, really need to come to Dodoma so that I can have a Kiswahili immersion and become more confident in Kiswahili. So I will take that invitation. I know you have invited me, and I haven't given up. Now, when it comes to education and principles of education based on the concepts of Mwalimu, we know that having been educated within the English context, he maintained his Africanness in such a way that coming back, I sometimes think of how the colonizers would have thought, okay, let's take these great leaders, bring them over to England, teach them so that they can go and represent us. But they didn't realize that there were some who were already transformational enough to actually say, having been in your context and learned all this, now I need to go back and be myself within my own environment and use the skills and principles that I have picked up in this nation. And I think this is something that a lot of us, a lot of our young people need to learn and to embrace, that having had the privilege and opportunity to go to another nation to learn, it doesn't mean that you are breaking away from your own culture. This should make you a better person. Now, when it comes to the legacy of Mwalimu, could you give us some idea in terms of the level of his influence within the academic environment, places of higher learning? I mean, you are an academician, sir, and you've worked with different colleges and universities, not just in Tanzania, but globally. What would you say are some of the evidences of his legacy within the educational system? I know that you're part of TeachBeyond, which is transformational education. So give us some information on what is happening.
Yeah, sure. Yes, of course, at the University of Dar es Salaam, there is a Mwalimu Julius Nyerere chair, which is a department, a unit of the university advancing scholarship in general on Mwalimu's contribution to humanity. So his philosophies, his philosophy of education, philosophy of development, even his philosophy of freedom, of independence, of democracy, his ideas on all those ideals of that we cherish very much. He had particular ways of thinking about those. So there is a chair at the University of Dar es Salaam advancing that. But I also know around the world there are departments within the faculties or schools of African studies around universities around the world have either desks or programs focusing on Mwalimu's thought, the history, thought, and contribution and legacies. So there is a lot going on in terms of study, research, legacy issues that are taking place at Makerere, where he went to college. there is an annual lectureship, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere lectureship, advancing his thought. Um, in Harare, there is a center, the SARLEC, Southern African Research and Documentation Center. When I was ambassador there, I participated in some of the programs, and they very much support and champion research and publications on Mwalimu's ideals. He, of course, there's a host of publications by him and about him on a variety of topics: education, development, people, freedom, governance, all those. So there's a lot. I would say there's a lot going on in the higher education circles with regard to advancing Mwalimu's ideals and his legacy in general.
This is very, very encouraging to actually know that there are places of higher learning around the world that have recognized who Mzee Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere is. And as we are talking today, we're talking about his legacy, which is not like it happened over there, but it's also happening now. It's a continuation of his principles and his values. Again, if you've just joined us, this is Today's Africa on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, coming all the way from the studios in Toronto, in Canada. That's where the studio is based, and we're very, very grateful to our brother Theo and his team who ensure that things are set up so that we can have these conversations, these informative, brave conversations around the world. I'm broadcasting from the US. Our brother Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mbennah is in South Africa. He is in
Tanzania.
In Tanzania, and we have our brother Theo who is in Canada. We have other people in Malawi. We have people in Zimbabwe. We have people in Mauritius who are listening in. So we're really, really delighted to have our brother here with us to help us understand the legacy of Mzee Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And I don't think, like I said, we can do justice to who he is, who he was in just one session. So one of the things that you alluded to was principles of integrity. Now, I know that there was a humility within this man, just in terms of how he presented himself, how he connected with others. He saw himself as one of the people. He did not see himself as someone who is above. And in terms of integrity, I know that at some point, having embraced certain economic approaches to life, there was a time that he realized, you know what, this can be done. Maybe this may not be done at this point. Would you have some aspects you would like to share with us with regards to his humility?
Yes. Mwalimu was definitely a man of commitment, high commitment to integrity, as personal integrity, but integrity as a leader. So he wanted to be fair, he wanted to be just, and he expected everyone else to be fair and just. And so he was very much opposed to any forms of oppression or discrimination, like I said earlier. He wanted fair ground. Of course, as a new independent country in Africa from a colonial legacy, Mwalimu wanted to bring back Tanzanians to a typical African mindset in the way they operated. They ran the government, they did the economics, all of that, because experience has it across history that people would tend to perpetuate the legacies of the colonial colonial powers from where they have attained independence. So there was the danger of having Tanganyikans or Tanzanians black in skin, but white and British in mentality and priorities and frameworks, in mental frameworks. So he wanted a break from that. He wanted a community approach, a communitarian approach to economics. So he came up with the philosophy, the self-reliance philosophy, we call it socialism, ujamaa, which was really a community-centered philosophy of development, that we work together, we develop together, and no one should exploit another. And he, in his understanding of socialism, that all the major means of production should be in the hands of government, so that not one or a few people own the railways or the airlines or the harbors, the major means of production, so that they will then be subjecting others to um, exploitation. So he wanted to make sure all the major means of production and all the access to all the key facilities, university, high schools, all those were equally accessible to people. So he nationalized those in 1967 on the announcement of the Arusha Declaration. And he wanted the Arusha Declaration was basically saying, it's education. We want self-reliance. We don't want to be dependent in our mindset. We don't have uncles and aunties out there to bring us help. We need to mobilize our own selves and produce self-reliance. So it was a perpetuation of maybe even a rediscovery of the typical African mindset of working together and addressing our issues, not necessarily depending on others. But unfortunately, there were many forces that worked against that philosophy within the country, but even more so outside of the country, because he was misconstrued as being a Marxist or even a communist. But he was neither of those. But because of that misreading of his intentions, he was then subjected to a lot of sabotage and a lot of strict maneuvers, so that that philosophy would not succeed. And in the end, he admitted in 1984, the year before he stepped down, he said, well, he had hoped this would work. It did not work. So he admitted he had failed in that regard because the economy did not go so well. But I don't think the economy failed. That's my view now. I don't think the economy failed because of the Ujamaa, because of the philosophy, but I think it's because of the forces that worked against to make sure Ujamaa did not succeed. It would have succeeded. It would have been a very wonderful, route to development and to growing a different kind of society in Tanzania. But he admitted he had made mistakes. But I think, in my view, he would have been more fair to himself to say, he had tried this. He did not foresee the forces that would oppose him. I did not calculate enough to counter those. But the philosophy in itself, I don't think there was anything wrong with it. But he admitted he had failed. And then for humility, he was a humble man. He would say, yes, I have failed and I am stepping down. So he stepped down even when there was the masses would say, we still wanted him to continue. So humble, you do not have to say, change the constitution so I continue. He did not have, in fact, he was very open to that change. He wanted to step down because of that.
Ambassador Professor Mbennah, the words you're sharing with us are really, really powerful, and they strike some of us to the core, because we realize that sometimes you end up in positions of leadership with good intentions, and it's very possible that other people can misconstrue that.
Yeah.
And we know this is exactly what happened with him, which is really, really sad. Instead of having conversations with him to try to understand what he was saying and what he stood for, people, out of fear and just misalignment with the things that he stood up for,
Yeah. Yeah.
would go to the side and actually undermine him and sabotage him, which is really, really sad. Now, I know that it's not easy for a leader to actually admit that, you know what, this has not worked without trying to justify yourself. This has not worked. I'm stepping down so that somebody else can come up and carry us to the next level. We need more leaders like that in Africa.
We do.
We need
We do.
more of those. And this is why I am encouraged to hear that we do have places of higher learning in Africa and around the world where people are concentrating on the legacy to learn. You know that concept of Sankufa in Ghana, where we look back to learn from the past so that we can inform the future. And so we really hope that more and more of our leaders in Africa and upcoming leaders, and I think this is what excites me when it comes to your mentioning that there's a chair at the University of Dar es Salaam to talk about his principles and values of Mzee Mwalimu Nyerere, and advance those principles so that our next generations of leaders are aware of things that have worked, things that have not worked, and why they didn't work. Because you made comment to something that made me realize that we ought to be self-reliant, yes, but we also need to be self-critical. We need to be analyzing ourselves every now and again to say, are
Yeah.
we doing the right thing? What are we doing? What can be done better? Because just to embrace what is out there for a quick fix will not help us to get anywhere.
No.
So I really appreciate the perspectives that you have brought. Now, I know that you are, whether you like it or not, even though you're a former, you're still active and you carry that title ambassador for the rest of your life. If you were to speak to an ambassador or to a group of ambassadors who are from outside of Africa and they came and gathered in your office and you had an opportunity to speak to these ambassadors from all over the world who are not African and they came to your office, what are some of the things you would say to them in terms of understanding Africa?
Well, I'll say Africa is mature. It's mature enough to make a contribution to the global community. It's mature and capable to and has the right to sit at the table among equals. And the mindset that says Africa is poor, Africa is underdeveloped, Africa is the least something continent, that mindset is unfortunate as incorrect, because it perpetuates efforts to keep Africa at that level, even including denying Africa the space where Africa's contribution would be is needed for by the world. So it's really to the disadvantage of the global community when Africa is denied that opportunity and the space to make a contribution, because Africa is mature. Africa has the intellectual resources to make a contribution for a better world. So I would say the world outside of Africa needs to adjust its understanding of Africa. Maybe even to drop or even unlearn some of the things that have picked along the way that are very stereotypic about Africa, and they are just not correct. I'll say that. And second, I'll say Africa has the resources, the mineral resources, the natural resources, vast. I would say stop robbing Africa's resources, and that would be very much a Mwalimu Julius Nyerere voice as well. don't exploit Africa, and don't deny Africa the voice to decide on the pricing of its goods, be it mineral or agricultural products. Don't be the ones to decide on the prices of the things that Africa produces. Let Africa be an equal, a rightful player at the table in the League of Nations. And I would say, all countries are countries of human beings. There's no one country that has perfect human beings any more or differently than the rest. The rest of us. So don't keep Africa in your mind. It's the Africa of yesterday, the Africa that has nothing to offer.
Ambassador Professor Mbennah, you sound like an ambassador and you sound like a theologian just in the last few comments that you have made. Africa is mature. Africa is capable of sitting at the table with everybody else as equals. Africa has resources. Listen, there's no perfect nation out there. There's no perfect continent. We all have feet of clay. But let's treat one another as human beings. This is powerful. This is powerful. Now, let's look at it from another perspective. You have just spoken to a group of ambassadors and high commissioners of different nations who are coming to Africa to serve, and you've just spoken to them. Now, let's turn it around. Ambassadors from Africa who end up in other parts of the world, what comes to mind, sir? What would you say to them as they represent the beautiful continent of Africa?
I would say very much like you've said, Dr. Mpindu, they need to present Africa as a beautiful continent, very much capable, very much resourced. They need to represent Africa in ways that will command the respect Africa deserves. They need to be very independent and very competent and confident voices from Africa and about Africa. They need to correct the narrative that they encounter, perpetuated by the countries where they serve. There are narratives about Africa that are not correct. They are not healthy. They are demeaning even at times. They need not remain silent. They need to correct. They need to advance the modern narrative about Africa, and they need to protect the resources of Africa. They need to be a voice for the protection of the natural resources of Africa. They need to say Africa cannot be the ground for conflicts that are engineered by other parts of the world. Africa must be let to be free, and Africa must be let to exercise their sovereignty. They are sovereign states. Is a continent of sovereign countries, members. They need to be sovereign, and ambassadors elsewhere, everywhere, African ambassadors to the rest of the world must be that very strong voice. Africa, is a country, is a continent, is capable, has resources. We want to make a contribution. Don't exploit us. Change your narrative that is not correct about Africa.
This is very, very encouraging, sir. Thank you very much. As I have mentioned, we broadcast in over 140 different countries around the world. And it is always encouraging to know that even within our listenership and our viewers, there are some people who have great responsibilities insofar as bringing changes within our nations and around the world is concerned. Someone here made a comment and said that the person, character, and leader in Muse is the kind of blueprint young leaders who are going to take over leadership from the remnants of the generation of Muse needs to adopt. They need to adopt it if Africa is going to be a safe space for generations to come.
I
And
agree.
they also said that I'm happy to have connected and learned more about Muse because I am a 70s baby and knew little about Mwalimu Nyerere. And so there are so many things that we can learn. One of the things that happens, Ambassador Professor Mbennah, is at the end of the show, people will bring in their comments and questions. So that's why I was saying this is not the first and last time we're having you, because people will write questions, and there's no way we would be in a position to answer those questions, but we would have to bring you back so that you can respond to those.
Sure.
Again, this is Today's Africa, and I am your host, Dr. FM, coming live on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, where we have healthy, interactive, brave conversations on matters pertaining to Africa. And today we have the opportunity and privilege of having Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah, who is a son of the soil, a son of Africa, who has had so many leadership positions globally, and yet he has remained African. And in our conversation today, he has highlighted a number of things that we have to bring him back and drill him on those. And we're just looking at the time here and realize, oh my goodness, the hour is almost over. Ambassador Professor Mbennah, we are delighted to have you in the studio with us today, sir, and thank you for making time in your busy schedule to be with us today. Now,
Thank
we've
you.
talked about a number of things, and you have highlighted the value and principles that Mwalimu stood for. And as we are talking now, we're talking about his legacy, which we want to see continue, because our young leaders and even the older leaders, we need to continue to learn and to embrace these because we need them today and even more. What are some of the things that you would say, having said all this? Here are some closing remarks. I know I will be back, but here are some closing remarks. In other words, if you forget everything else I have said, I want you to remember this. What are some of those you would like to share with us, sir, before we let you off the hook today? And again, this has been a real special treat. And of course, we encourage all our listeners and viewers to subscribe, to like, to share the channel so that you can let others know that we are here. So over to you, Ambassador.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Mpindu, for today. And sure, I look forward to another time when we can engage on some issues about Mwalimu or any other issue about Africa. But as for today, if I were to say, remember things from the legacy of Mwalimu, I would say, let us consider Mwalimu the person and the principles he stood by and emulate those. He was humble. He was a leader, and for him, leadership was for service to the society, not for self-gain. He was committed to integrity. He was committed to the advancement of the people of Africa as one people. He wanted a better world where there is peace, equality, justice, and non-discriminatory situations, no oppression. So those are the things that he stood for. Those are the things that he championed. As a matter of fact, even those who misconstrued him for being a Marxist or a communist failed to understand that he was actually behind the non-aligned movement, which was a group of countries, and was a he was a key person behind that. A group of countries said we are neither west nor east. We want to be ourselves. So he had those principles that I think we can emulate. He was Mwalimu the person will inspire you. Mwalimu the person will teach you. Mwalimu the person will give you a perfect example of a leader and just a human being fit for and needed by our world.
Ambassador Professor Emmanuel Mwaluko Mbennah, thank you so much for being with us. I must say, before we come to a close, one of the things that really touched my heart when you talk about unity and you talked about emulating his humility, his commitment to integrity, to unity of one Africa, being of service. Leadership was a service, not self-gain. There was a documentary where someone was looking at his life and the things that belonged to him when he died and what he did after he stepped down, what he was doing and where he was living, his his relationship to his own family. I just stood in awe and I said, here is a man who lived his life for others. He
Yeah.
wasn't depriving himself. There is the place that he has developed for his own place in his own, you know, area for himself. But it wasn't a 24, 34 bedroom mansion.
Yeah.
He established a place for himself. And I'm saying to myself, indeed, there is lots we can learn. Now, nobody can be forced to learn anything, but I think when we understand the reasoning behind why certain things have happened and why he is who he is and his journey, we're hoping that people would want to emulate this kind of leadership and say, you know what? It's never too late to do the right thing. And
Correct.
the time to do the right thing is always now, as Dr. Martin Luther King said. So again, Ambassador Professor, thank you so much for being with us today. And to all our listeners, thank you for making time to be with us on today's Africa. And I
Thank
have
you.
been your host, Dr. FM, coming from the studios in Toronto, Canada, and of course, broadcasting from outside of Canada. Thank you so much for being with us all the way from Tanzania. We're delighted that you have been with us. And to our listeners, feel free to log in. There is a program every minute with Love Bay, Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. There is music, all genres of music, other programs as well with different guests on various topics. And so stay in touch, stay tuned, because this is a station that is making a difference around the world. And of course, you having joined us today, we appreciate that. We don't take that for granted because we know that on a date like today, you could have been somewhere else and you could have been doing other things, but you chose to be with us. So thank you, as they say in Kiswahili, asante.
Asante
Asante
sana.
sana. Asante sana. Thank you very much. And we're delighted that you have been with us. So, again, we'll meet again next week as we look into brave conversations, matters pertaining to Africa. Thank you very much for being with us. Until next time.
Thank you.